morning, students. This is C++ Unit 1, Object-Oriented Concept and Principles. Before starting, what is C? C is a high-level language, also called Procedure-Oriented Programming Language. Some of the high-level languages, such as Copal, Fortran, and C. So the oldest language, Copal and Fortran, is also a high-level language. The procedure-oriented approach. The problem is viewed as a sequence of things to be done, such as reading, calculating, and printing. So this is the approach for procedure-oriented programming. In every procedure-oriented programming language consists of writing a list of instructions. Writing a list of instructions. Instruction means it is actions for the computer to follow and organizing these instructions into groups known as functions. The more than one instructions or group of instructions are called functions in procedure oriented approach. Some of the characteristics of procedure oriented programming language are: most of the functions share global data in procedure oriented programming. A large program are divided into smaller programs. Smaller programs means it is known as functions. Functions transform data from one form to another. In procedure oriented approach is done on top down in programming design. Now we are going to see object oriented concepts. So this is also a high level procedure oriented, or here C is a procedure oriented programming language. Here in C++ object oriented programming language. In object oriented approach is to remove some of the procedural approach. So what are the difference between object oriented concepts and procedure oriented concepts? In object oriented concepts, every problem has decomposed number of entities called objects. Number of entities called objects. In that, objects can be accessed only by the functions associated with the data. That is, data of an object can be accessed only by the functions associated with that object, but functions of one object can access the functions of other objects. So these are all the things for different removing the procedural approach. But whereas in procedural approach, most of the functions are global data, but here functions of one object can access the functions of other objects, but data can be accessed only by the functions associated with the object. So these are all the differentiate for object oriented and procedure oriented programming language. We go to next slide for object oriented paradigm. This is the object oriented paradigm. Paradigm means the way of things for doing, seeing, and doing. So how to design and how to create methods, then how to handle methods and how to design methods. So these are all the doing things for object oriented programming language. First one is object oriented programming. So OOPS organizing softwares. Each software has a collection of objects. Because of a problem, it can be decomposed into objects, that is entities with a certain state and behavior. The object is based on identification and organization. Object oriented design is based on identification and organization of its objects. Then methodology. There are several methods are there. There are several methods or several methodologies. We have to include the construction of models, the development of softwares. Object oriented modeling and design. So object oriented design is based on the real world entities, that is object. So every models using the design is independently of a programming language. Okay, go to next slide for objects. So this is one of the basic concepts of C++. Object is a entity or for identifying, or it contains attributes and modules of code called operations or methods. So attributes means it is associated with the values. The value should be hidden or inside the objects. Suppose we want to sending a message to one object to another by invoking a method. So this is simple definition of objects. We go to next. This is the block diagram of objects. So already I mention it. Object is a real world entity. So here every item is taken as a object. For example, a person, a bank account, or some other items. You can take any item as a object. Now I am taking woman. So woman is a object, or lady is a object. There are two attributes. One is age, another one is salary. So how to access this attributes? There are some methods are there. First one is set salary, another one is get age. So this is the methods for accessing those data. Go to next. This is encapsulation. So encapsulation means data abstraction and encapsulation. The data is not accessible to the outside world. The data is not accessible to the outside world because the data is hiding. The data is hiding. So that's why the name is data abstraction. Also encapsulation is also called a data abstraction. You go next slide. Procedural versus object oriented. So from the first the introduction area, procedure oriented programming, object oriented programming language. Procedure oriented programming language, as mentioned it, every problem consists of smaller number of functions. But object oriented programming, a problem can be defined as objects. From that object it consists of data and functions. Okay, this is the difference between procedure and object oriented. Go to next. Classes. Classes is the second most concept of OOPS. Class is a template. Class is a template. A class is a collection of objects of similar type. For example, mango, apple, and orange are members of the class fruit. Members of the class fruit. Classes are user-defined data types and behave like the built-in types of a programming language. So class is a user-defined data types and behave like built-in types of programming language. So first we shall create a class name. So class is fruit. Further, you can add some objects of its class. For example, mango, apple, and orange. These are all the fruits for member of its class. Okay. In class, objects are generated by these classes and they actually contain values. So every object are generated by the class, that is a template. Then when objects are no longer needed by the application, they are eliminated. But the classes we could not eliminate until we complete our problems. But objects are modified, so that's why it is eliminated. Okay, go to next slide. Class and objects. Class and objects. So first we can declare a class. So class is furniture. There are several objects related to our class. One is desk, another one is chair A, third one is chair B. So there are three objects with interfacing one class, that is furniture. Go to next. Message passing and associations. A class does not send message to each other. A class does not send message to each other, but the functions or methods are associated with the class can send message to each other, that is communicate with the one object to other objects. That's why object and object can send a message, but class do not send a message for each other. Next, static diagram or class diagram. A static diagram or class diagram, it does not show the movement of messages, because in the first point a class does not send message to each other, so it will not show the movement of messages. Next, aggregation. A object contains other objects because of it is communicate with one function to other functions, one object function to other object functions. That's why the whole object is a part of or its own relationship. Go to next slide. Class hierarchy and inheritance. Inheritance is here another important concepts for OOPS. A process of creating new class from an existing class is called inheritance. So one class hierarchy diagram is there. First we create one class, that is a parent class for chair. For that parent class can inherit two child class, that is chair type A and chair type B. The child class is also called as subclasses. So this is inheritance. The next slide we shall go to overview of inheritance. That is class inheritance and specialization. First, the parent class name is furniture. There are two attributes. So there are one attributes and one method is there. That is A1 is attribute, A1 for method. This method can inherit its child class, that is chairs and executive chairs. Okay, go to next. Public, private, and protected. So private means it can only accessed by its own methods. Public means it can be modified by methods and associated with any class. That is, it is accessed worldwide. But in private, it accessed by its own methods. Then protected. It is a special case. It is only used for subclasses. Next, method signature. So method signature means a method. There are different types of. There are same. A method should include method name and parameters. That must be passed with the message in order of method to function. Sometimes the user want to create method names, same method names, but different parameters for properly. In C++ compiler, this will allow to create different methods with the same name. Okay, this is method signature. Okay, go to next, polymorphism. So polymorphism means is the ability of an object to take on many forms. That means same method will behave differentially when it is applied to the objects of different classes. Only one method for creating a user for one class. For that method we can apply different objects. It will be worked. That is the polymorphism. Also means different method associated with different classes can interpret the same message in different ways. So different method will behave differentially when it's applied for to the objects. Similarly, different method will associate with the different classes will behave same message in different ways. So this is the polymorphism. There are two types of polymorphism: runtime polymorphism and compile time polymorphism. Under in runtime polymorphism, the example is dynamic binding. The compile time polymorphism for the example is static binding. So in the dynamic binding or dynamic polymorphism, comes under method overriding. So method overriding means it is a process of declaring a single method in a subclass that is present in a parent class. Simply we call it as inheritance. That is, inheritance is the other word is overriding. The next one is static polymorphism. That is a method overloading. This method will allow, this overloading means a method would allow the programmer to implement various methods. They might use the same names but their parameters are different. That is method overloading. So method overriding is to inherit the parents parent functions. Method overloading is same method but different parameters. Okay, this will complete one question for object oriented concepts. Thank you.